So in today's lesson we're going to be looking at what a 6-mark question might look like for the topic of B6 when it comes to your GCSEs, and we're going to look at one question. Welcome to What's Your Question? Let's go! I've placed your starter questions here then. There's only 2 of them. The first one's what's an antigen, the second one is what is an antibody, because this links to our 6-mark question today, that will be all about vaccines. Okay, so an antigen then is just anything that they get into your body and will cause an immune response. So any of those pathogens we've talked about before, the virus, the bacteria, the protist or the fungi are all examples of pathogens, and also any toxins that can make you ill as well would also count as antigens. An antibody is just something that's produced by the body to fight those antigens off. It is produced by the white blood cells. And once it's been produced once, we know that the white blood cells remember how to fight off those diseases, and we say we then have a memory of how to fight those off because of the T cells, the memory cells that remember those different diseases and how to fight them off. Let's get on with the lesson then. Because the only thing we're looking at today is 6-mark questions, really got one objective. It shouldn't take us long to read through it then, just looking at some long answer exam questions that you might come across. This 6-mark question that you can see is about the vaccinations for polio. You're provided with a graph and the information around it says the following. Polio is an illness caused by a virus. In 1988, a campaign started to rid the world of polio. The campaign wanted the vaccine to vaccinate children all over the world. Look at the graph below, it shows the number of polio cases in the world from 1984 to 2004. Note, the graph starts at 1984, the campaign started in 1988. This probably will be important later. Explain how vaccinations work and use the data to conclude if the campaign was successful or not. Anytime you're answering a 6-mark question, I recommend you try and break it down into the questions it's made up of. There's no 6-mark question really, it's one big block of writing on one topic for you to do. It's generally a few 2-mark questions or 2 3-mark questions just stuck together. To help you find those things, the first step is to decode your answer. You should be looking for the command words, any important information, and specifically what you should be talking about as well. I've highlighted them here. In yellow, I've put the command words. You've been asked to explain and conclude, and to use the data to conclude. We put in purple what specifically you should be talking about. You should be explaining how vaccinations work, and you should be using the data to conclude if the campaign was successful or not. I've also highlighted those bits in green that I think are going to be important to this. It does tell you in there to look at the graph. That means they're going to want you to refer to the graph. And if you look at the question, use the data. The only data you have here is in that graph. You will need to talk about that data. You'll need to specifically refer to the numbers in that graph that you can extract. Once you've decoded it, the next step is to plan your answer. And the 3 things you need to make sure you're doing here is to explain how the vaccinations work, to decide whether the campaign was successful, or refer to data to support your claim when you're doing this. So, we need to explain how vaccinations work. That's fairly simple. We've covered that in lessons before. Or you should have covered that in lessons if you've reached the end of B6. Decide whether the campaign was successful. It's a vaccination campaign trying to stop polio. So what you've got to do is look at the graph and decide in the time the campaign went on for, was polio either significantly reduced or entirely eradicated. And you will need to say whether you think it's successful based on what you think. If you think not getting rid of it completely does not mean it's successful, say that. Support your ideas. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with you doing that. If you think it was successful because it got rid of most of the cases, that's fine too. Say what you think, but justify it with data. You must refer to that data as it specifically asks you to in the question. And I've highlighted that in red because if you don't do that, you're going to miss out on really easy marks. Now, I'd like you to have a go at writing your answer based on those 3 points you need to make. Explain how a vaccination works. What does your body do? Use those keywords we've talked about before. They're really, really important. Decide whether the campaign was successful. Refer to data to back up your decision. You must do those 3 things. Make an attempt to write it down again. Split your page if you're writing it on paper. Make sure you've got a margin. Write those 3 things in the margin and tick them off as you go along. It will be much better if you do that. This is our plan for the answer. Planning our answer. Now it's time to answer it. Pause the video here. Make an attempt. Submit. Great. So, The final thing for us to do is to check that what we've done. Read back through what you've said. Have you explained how vaccination works? Have you used the word antigen, antibody somewhere in there? You should do. Have you made a decision whether the campaign was successful? Have you referred to data to support your claim? You should have done. Great. Let's go through what the answers would be for, the marks would be for them. Again, as always, they've split the answer here into 3 levels. Level 1 would be an incomplete explanation of how vaccines work, without reference to either antibodies or antigens, or you make a valid conclusion using the data. So somewhere in there you've attempted to explain how the vaccines work and have got some of it correct. You may have used the word pathogen instead of antigens and said white blood cells instead of antibodies being produced, or the immune system fights it off. If you've done that, you're getting 2 marks for this question. For level 2, the 3 or 4 marks, you be getting an incomplete explanation of how vaccines work, which includes correct reference to either antibodies or antigens. So you should have said either of those 2 keywords for level 2. If you've mentioned one of them, you're looking at level 2 already. Again, or the idea of memory cells. Sorry, that should be included with the last bit. Or the idea of memory cells, remembering you can fight off that. And you should make a valid conclusion using the data for level 2. So if you've not done both things, you are still level 1. You're not getting level 2 at all. And finally, for level 3, you've made a complete explanation of how the vaccines work. You've referred to all 3 of those terms, and you've got a valid conclusion using the data. So for level 1, you've just talked about vaccines, or you've just made a conclusion. For level 2, you've referred to one of those 3 keywords and made a conclusion. And the final bit is you've explained all of it really well. Before we look at what the marks are available for, decide which of those 3 sections your marks you think your answer fits into, based on what it says there. And then we'll go through the answers next, because before you look at the answers, you should decide where you think you fit. For the vaccine, you should have said, for level 1, harmless or inactive or dead pathogen or virus given to the person, injected into the person. The vaccine triggers an immune response and the individual is then made immune. For level 2 and 3, you should have said that vaccines contain antigens, keyword. The antigen triggers an immune response. The white blood cells produce antibodies. The antibodies link to specific antigens. The antibodies destroy the pathogens, and you should have mentioned the idea of those memory cells, so the next time you're infected, you can produce the antibodies more quickly. That's a level 2 and 3 response there. If you mention any one of those keywords, remember, that's level 2, all of them is level 3. And finally, the scientific points on conclusion may include the vaccine program is working as the number of cases falls after 1988 or after the start of the campaign. The vaccination program is working as recent cases are below 1,000. Not successful as there are still cases is fine as well. As I said earlier, either one is fine as long as you're referring to numbers. If you haven't said no numbers, you get the marks for none of these. The data only goes to 2004, so the final outcome is not known. You could refer to as well, that's fine. If you just say numbers go down from 1984 to 2004, you'd be the lower mark at that relevant level. And that is because you're not referring to the campaign in any way, and you've got to refer to the campaign here. The fact that the campaign is what's successful. If you're just talking about the numbers and what that shows, you're not referring to the effectiveness of the campaign, and you're not drawing a conclusion about its effectiveness, and that's what they really want here. That's it. Hope that really helped. If you've got any questions, throw them in the comments and I can answer them for you. Thanks very much for watching. Make sure you stay safe, stay alert, stay curious, and subscribe.